Welcome, everyone. I'm Dusky Nights, and before we begin, I'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching from, and what time is it for you? Drop a comment below. Also, I want to know what kind of stories you enjoy, and make sure to listen till the end. I grew up in a neighborhood where everyone knew each other, a quiet place where nothing ever seemed out of place. But there was always one house that stood apart. It sat at the very end of our street, a towering Victorian-style home. Its peeling white paint and dark, empty windows always seemed to be watching. Everyone called it the widow's house. It belonged to a frail, elderly woman named Mrs. Calloway. She always wore black. Her silver hair was pulled into a tight bun. Her face was pale and expressionless. The other kids whispered about her, saying she had been a widow for as long as anyone could remember. She never left her house during the day, only at night, standing behind the curtains of her upstairs window, watching. At first it seemed like nothing more than an old woman keeping to herself. But then the disappearances began. That summer felt different. The air was thick, suffocating, like something unseen had settled over the neighborhood. Kids started whispering about a curse. People were vanishing. Not just anyone, only children, all of them under 12. They disappeared without a sound, without a struggle, just gone. One of them was my best friend, Tyler. He had been riding his bike past the widow's house when he vanished. His bike was found abandoned, its wheels still spinning, right at the edge of her yard. The police searched. They questioned everyone, knocked on every door, but nothing. It was as if the earth had swallowed him whole, but I knew. I felt it. Something inside that house was watching, waiting. That night, I could not sleep. The air in my room was heavy, thick with fear and something unspoken. My bed faced the window. From there I could see directly into her house. The curtains upstairs were parted, and there, standing perfectly still, was Mrs. Calloway. She was looking at me. I froze. Her face was too still, too pale. It almost did not seem real, but her eyes, they terrified me the most. Hollow, dark, sunken into her skull, like she had not slept in years. Then she smiled, not a warm smile, not a kind one, but something else, something that made my stomach twist. And then, ever so slowly, she raised her hand and pointed at me. I do not know how long I lay there, paralyzed, but I knew one thing. I had to know what was inside that house. Do not look at her, they said. If she sees you, she will never forget. I thought it was just a story, something meant to scare us. But then, one night, I woke up to the sound of breathing, slow, measured, right beside my bed. When I turned over, she was there, standing over me, whispering my name, and I knew then it was real. The next day, I forced myself to walk past her house. I kept my head down, but from the corner of my eye I could see the windows. No movement, no sign of her. Then I stopped. The front door was open, not fully, just a crack, just enough to see the darkness beyond, just enough to invite me inside. I should have run. I should have turned around and never looked back. But something pulled me forward, a voice deep inside my mind, whispering, "Go inside. Find out the truth." I took a step forward, then another. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. The wooden porch creaked beneath my weight. The smell of something rotten filled my nose. I pushed the door open, and that is when I saw it. The hallway was lined with portraits of children, dozens of them. Their faces were frozen in time, their eyes wide and terrified. Some were old, their colors faded, the frames covered in dust. Others looked new, fresh, as if the paint had barely dried. My breath caught in my throat. My hands turned cold. And then I heard them. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from above. I looked up, and there, at the top of the stairs, was Mrs. Calloway. She was not alone. She held someone, by the wrist. A child, a boy, no older than 10. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, his lips trembling. He was barefoot, his clothes tattered. Then I saw the worst part. I knew him. It was Tyler. He looked at me. His mouth opened, as if to speak, but no words came out. Just silence. Mrs. Calloway placed a long, bony finger to her lips. Shh. I do not remember running. I do not remember how I got home, but I remember the nightmares. For weeks, I told no one. The police came and went. The house was searched. They found nothing. Mrs. Calloway. She was gone, vanished, just like the children. The house stood empty after that. The windows were boarded up, the air around it, heavy, cursed. Years passed. I moved away. I tried to forget. But some nights, I dream of that house, of the whispers in the hallway, of the paintings of children, their eyes watching me. and of her standing behind the curtains, still watching, waiting. Who was Mrs. Calloway? Where did she go? And what happened to those children? If you think you have an answer, tell me in the comments below. But if you ever find yourself walking past an old empty house and you feel like something is watching you, do not look up. You might not like what you see. As the clock struck 11:15 p.m., a cold whisper brushed my ear. Come to me. In 1985, seeking refuge from the relentless chaos of city life, I settled into a quaint cottage nestled within the rolling hills and dense forests of Eldridge. The initial days were a balm to my weary soul. Mornings greeted me with the harmonious chirping of birds at precisely 6:30 a.m., while evenings were serenaded by the gentle rustling of leaves as the wind danced through the trees. However, as October deepened, an unsettling sensation began to permeate my serene existence. One crisp evening around 7:45 p.m., as I sat engrossed in a novel by the flickering fireplace, an inexplicable chill crept down my spine, accompanied by the eerie feeling of unseen eyes intently observing me. I attempted to dismiss it as merely the autumn cold seeping through the aged wooden walls, but the sense of being watched lingered, growing more palpable with each passing day. Subtle yet disconcerting changes within the cottage soon caught my attention. Picture frames that once hung straight now appeared slightly askew, and the enticing aroma of freshly baked bread wafted through the air. Despite my not having baked in days, these peculiar occurrences gnawed at my peace of mind. Then, one night, precisely at 11:15 p.m., a soft, almost imperceptible whisper echoed through the dimly lit hallway. Come to me. My heart pounded in my chest as I questioned my sanity, wondering if it was merely the wind or the natural creaking of the old house. Determined to uncover the source of these disturbances, I set up a tape recorder in the hallway before retiring to bed, hoping to capture any anomalies. The following morning, with a mix of apprehension and curiosity, I played back the recording. Amidst the static, a faint yet distinct voice whispered, "Join me in the shadows." A shiver coursed through me, solidifying my resolve to seek answers. I visited the local library and delved into the town's history, uncovering a haunting tale. In 1923, a woman named Eliza had resided in my very cottage. Renowned for her beauty and grace, Eliza had fallen deeply in love with a man who promised to return for her, but he never did. Heartbroken, she secluded herself within the cottage, waiting endlessly until she mysteriously vanished without a trace. This tragic story cast a somber shadow over my thoughts as I pondered the connection between Eliza's fate and the unsettling events I was experiencing. That night, at 10:30 p.m., as I sat by the window, the room's temperature seemed to plummet inexplicably. The flames in the fireplace flickered erratically, casting elongated dancing shadows upon the walls. A soft, melancholic melody, reminiscent of a lullaby, filled the air, its origin unknown. I felt an ethereal presence beside me, accompanied by a gentle, almost comforting touch on my shoulder. "Eliza," I whispered, my voice trembling with a blend of fear and curiosity. The shadows appeared to respond, swirling gracefully, and the whisper returned, clearer and more insistent this time. "Join me." Despite the fear that gripped me, an overwhelming curiosity propelled me forward. I followed the enigmatic shadows to the attic, a space I had seldom explored. Dust particles floated lazily in the moonlight, and the air was thick with anticipation. In the corner stood an old, tarnished mirror, its surface clouded with age. As I approached, the reflection that greeted me was not my own, but that of a sorrowful woman with pleading, yearning eyes. "Help me find peace," she implored, tears welling up in her eyes. Overcome with empathy, I nodded. "How?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The mirror fogged up, and words began to form. "Find the locket." Determined to assist, I embarked on a thorough search of the cottage, seeking the elusive locket. Hours turned into days, and just as hope began to wane, I discovered a loose floorboard beneath my bed. Inside, wrapped delicately in a time-worn handkerchief, lay a silver locket containing a faded photograph of Eliza and her long-lost lover. That night, at 11:55 p.m., I returned to the attic, the locket clutched tightly in my hand. Holding it up to the mirror, I watched as Eliza's reflection smiled, tears of gratitude glistening in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with relief. The room gradually warmed, and a profound sense of tranquility washed over me. Eliza's reflection slowly faded, leaving only my own staring back at me. The whispers ceased, and the cottage felt lighter, as if a great burden had been lifted. From that day forward, the eerie sensations that had once plagued me vanished. The cottage transformed into a true sanctuary, filled with warmth and peace. Yet every year, on October 15th at midnight, I place the locket by the window, honoring Eliza's memory and the inexplicable bond we shared. What do you believe truly transpired in that old cottage? Was it a restless spirit seeking closure, or merely the imaginings of a lonely soul? Share your thoughts below. And remember, sometimes the past lingers just a whisper away. Late at night, a soft knock echoed from my second-floor window. Impossible, yet undeniable. I have always been cautious, ensuring my doors are locked each night and avoiding dark alleys. Yet nothing prepared me for that fateful evening. It was a chilly Thursday in November 1985 when I returned home around 7 p.m. The streets were eerily silent, with only the crunch of leaves underfoot. As I unlocked my front door, an unsettling sensation washed over me, as if unseen eyes were upon me. Dismissing it as fatigue, I stepped inside, secured the door, and placed my bag on the kitchen table. The soft glow from the lamp cast comforting shadows, but an inexplicable unease lingered. Glancing out the window, I noticed a figure standing across the street, a tall man, motionless, staring directly at my house. Minutes passed, yet he remained unmoving, his face obscured by shadows. A shiver ran down my spine. Attempting to quell my anxiety, I closed the curtain and reasoned that he might be waiting for someone or simply lost. To distract myself, I warmed some soup, flipped through a magazine, and turned on the radio. However, the feeling of being watched persisted. An hour later, curiosity compelled me to peek through the curtain again. He was still there, but now closer, standing directly in front of my house. My heart raced. This was far from normal. I double-checked the locks, all secure. Should I call the police? What would I say? There's a man standing outside my house. It didn't seem urgent enough. Taking a deep breath, I decided to ignore him, hoping he would leave. I turned off the radio, brushed my teeth, and tried to convince myself everything was fine. But as I settled into bed, a soft, deliberate knock echoed from my bedroom window. My bedroom was on the second floor. I froze, my breathing shallow, hands gripping the blanket. There was no conceivable way someone could reach that window without a ladder. Unless another knock followed, slow and deliberate. Summoning courage, I turned my head. Through the drawn curtains, I discerned the faint outline of fingers pressing against the glass. I stifled a scream. Grabbing my phone, I dialed 911 with trembling hands. The ringing seemed interminable. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone outside my window, I whispered. On the second floor, the dispatcher requested my address and details. As I spoke, the knocking ceased, leaving an oppressive silence. Forcing myself to move, I peeked through the curtain. No one was there, only a faint smudge on the glass where the fingers had been. The operator assured me that an officer would drive by, but by the time they arrived, the man was gone. No signs of forced entry. just my word against the quiet night. Sleep eluded me. Morning brought a deceptive sense of normalcy. I went to work, attempting to dismiss the incident as a bad dream. But that evening, as I unlocked my door, the unsettling sensation of being watched returned. I hesitated before entering, my hands clammy on the doorknob. Slowly, I glanced at the window's reflection. There he was again, standing across the street, watching. He had come back. Panic surged. I quickly entered, locked the door, and considered calling someone. Before I could act, I heard it. Footsteps, not outside, but inside the house, soft and deliberate. Someone was in here with me. The realization hit hard. I had locked the door, been so careful, yet he was already inside. Grabbing a heavy book from the table, I held it defensively. My pulse pounded as I moved toward the sound. The hallway was dark, the air thick with dread. Then I saw it. The basement door, slightly ajar. I was certain I had closed it earlier. Tightening my grip on the book, every instinct screamed to flee, but I needed to know. With a deep breath, I pushed the door open. Nothing. No one. Just the basement stairs descending into darkness. Stepping back, my mind raced. Had he been hiding here all along, watching me? The thought made me nauseous. I called the police again, my voice trembling. They searched the house and surrounding area, but he was gone. No signs of a break-in, just me, alone. Or so I thought, as the officers left. Promising increased patrols, I noticed something on the hallway mirror. Written in faint, smudged letters was a chilling message. I will see you soon. What do you think happened next? Was he ever caught? Share your thoughts below, and always remember to check your lock. As the clock struck midnight, the phone rang. A child's voice whispered, "Why did you forget me?" In the quiet town of Eldridge, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, I found solace in my daily routines. The year was 1985, and life moved at a predictable pace. Every morning at precisely 7 a.m., I would sip my coffee while watching the sun cast golden hues over the landscape. The tranquility was comforting, a stark contrast to the chaos of the city I had left behind. One crisp autumn evening, as the clock struck 9:45 p.m., I settled into my favorite armchair with a novel in hand. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but inside, the warmth of the fireplace enveloped me. Just as I was about to turn a page, the phone rang, its sharp tone slicing through the silence. Glancing at the clock, I wondered who would call at such an hour. Lifting the receiver, I hesitated before speaking. A voice, barely more than a whisper, uttered a single word, remember. A chill ran down my spine. The line went dead before I could respond. I stared at the phone, the dial tone humming ominously. Memories I had long buried began to surface, unbidden and unwelcome. The following days were uneventful, yet an undercurrent of unease lingered. I busied myself with chores, hoping to distract my restless mind. One afternoon, while tending to the garden, I noticed a figure standing at the edge of the woods. Dressed in dark clothing, they seemed to be watching me. I blinked, and they were gone, leaving me to question my own eyes. That night, sleep eluded me. At 2:15 a.m., a faint tapping echoed through the house. I rose from bed, heart pounding, and followed the sound to the front door. Opening it cautiously, I found no one there, only the cold night air greeting me. A sense of foreboding settled in my chest. Determined to uncover the truth, I visited the town's library the next day. The librarian, Mrs. Hawthorne, was a kind woman in her 60s, always eager to assist. I inquired about the history of my house, hoping to find some logical explanation for the disturbances. She produced old newspapers and documents detailing events I had never known. In 1923, a family had lived in my home, a couple and their young daughter, Eliza. Tragically, Eliza had disappeared one evening, never to be found. Her parents, consumed by grief, left the town shortly after. The case remained unsolved, a dark stain on Eldridge's history. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I sat on the porch, absorbing the revelations. The air was thick with the scent of pine and earth. A sense of connection to the past enveloped me. At 8:30 p.m., the phone rang again. This time, I was prepared. Lifting the receiver, I waited. A child's voice, soft and melancholic, whispered, "Why did you forget me?" My breath caught. "Eliza," I ventured, the name feeling foreign on my tongue. The line crackled, and then silence. Tears welled in my eyes, an overwhelming sadness washing over me. Determined to make amends, I searched the property the next day. Near an old oak tree, I discovered a small, weathered box buried beneath the roots. Inside, a locket containing a faded photograph of a little girl, Eliza. Holding it, I felt a connection, a promise to remember. That night, as the clock struck midnight, I placed the locket on the mantel. A sense of peace settled over the house. The disturbances ceased, and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. Eliza's memory was honored, her presence acknowledged. Years have passed since those events. The house remains serene, a haven of tranquility. Yet, every so often, at 3:15 p.m., I catch a glimpse of a little girl playing beneath the oak tree, her laughter echoing softly in the breeze. A reminder that some spirits linger, not out of malice, but in search of remembrance. Even now, I wonder, was it all real or merely the manifestations of a lonely mind? The boundary between reality and the supernatural is thin, easily blurred. Perhaps in acknowledging the past, we find peace in the present. Or maybe, just maybe, some echoes of history are destined to remain, whispering their tales to those willing to listen. As I sit here, penning down these memories, the clock chimes softly. It's 6 p.m., and the evening sun casts long shadows across the room. The locket still rests on the mantel, a silent testament to a forgotten life. And in the quiet moments, when the world is still, I listen. For the laughter, for the whispers, for the haunting echoes of the past. If you ever find yourself in Eldridge, take a moment to visit the old house by the woods. Perhaps you'll feel it too, the lingering presence of memories long gone, yet ever present. And remember, some stories are meant to be told, others to be felt. This is one such tale. As we stepped into the underpass, the air turned colder, and our footsteps echoed unnaturally. Late-night walks had always been my refuge. The city, under the cloak of darkness, felt serene. My friend Aaron and I often strolled home together after our evening shifts, favoring a shortcut through an old railway underpass. It saved us time. The path was dimly lit, with flickering streetlights casting eerie patterns on the cracked pavement. Yet we never felt threatened until that night. As we turned the corner, an unsettling heaviness filled the air. Aaron nudged me. "Do not look now, but I think someone is behind us," he murmured. My heart raced. I resisted the urge to turn around. Instead, I glanced at the shop windows ahead, using the glass to catch a glimpse behind us. 2 figures. No, 3. They were distant enough to appear casual, yet close enough to feel menacing. "Just keep walking," I whispered. The underpass loomed ahead. If we could make it through, we would be close to home. As we stepped into the tunnel, the temperature seemed to drop. Our footsteps echoed unnaturally. The familiar scent of damp concrete was overpowered by something else, something that made my stomach churn. Halfway through, Aaron muttered, "They are still there." I stole a quick glance. The figures had entered the tunnel. Their pace matched ours. Then one of them whistled. A shiver ran down my spine. It was a sharp, piercing note that reverberated off the tunnel walls. The kind of sound meant to get someone's attention. Aaron grabbed my wrist. Run! We bolted towards the exit. I could hear them behind us, their steps quickening. I did not dare look back. My lungs burned. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Just a few steps from the exit, a shadow moved ahead. Another figure, waiting. We skidded to a halt. Trapped. My mind raced. We could not go back. We could not move forward. Aaron's eyes darted to the right, a narrow gap between the concrete barrier and the tunnel wall. Just enough space to squeeze through. Go, he hissed. We forced ourselves through the gap, the rough brick scraping against my jacket. My heart pounded. I could hear them moving faster, their footsteps erratic. One of them muttered something unintelligible. We emerged on the other side, breathless, and dashed into the nearest alley. The street lights here were dim, barely illuminating the cracked pavement. We did not stop. We ran until the stitch in my side became unbearable, until my legs felt like lead. Then, silence. We ducked behind a row of dumpsters, gasping for air. The alley stretched ahead, leading towards a deserted industrial lot. No sign of them. I opened my mouth to speak, but Aaron held up a hand. A footstep. Close. We pressed ourselves against the cold metal of the dumpster. I could feel my breath bouncing back at me. The footsteps grew louder, slow, deliberate. Then they stopped, right on the other side. Neither of us moved. The only sound was my heartbeat hammering in my ears. Seconds felt like hours. Then the unmistakable sound of fingers tapping against metal. Light, rhythmic, tap, tap, tap. I clenched my jaw to keep from making a sound. Aaron's grip on my arm tightened. Then they walked away. We waited. 10 seconds. 20. A full minute. Aaron exhaled shakily. We need to get out of here. Keeping low, we slipped out of the alley and made our way toward the main road. The city was not empty, but it was not busy either. A few cars passed, oblivious to our terror. The streetlights felt warmer here, safer. We should call someone, Aaron said. I nodded, reaching for my phone with trembling fingers. But then something caught my eye. Across the street, beneath the glow of a flickering street lamp, one of them, standing completely still, watching. A chill ran through me. They were not chasing us anymore. They did not have to. They knew we saw them. And they wanted us to know that was enough. Aaron grabbed my sleeve. Do not look. Just keep walking. I swallowed hard and forced my legs to move. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I knew that was what they wanted. They thrived on fear. We turned the corner. I dared one last glance back. The figure was gone. But I knew, deep in my gut, that this was not over. It never would be. What do they want? Why did they stop chasing us? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you have ever experienced something similar, tell your story. Stay safe. Stay vigilant. The moment his hollow eyes met mine, I felt an icy dread settle deep within me. I used to think life was a series of random events, people coming and going without reason. But now, I question that belief. It began on a typical night at the diner where I work, a small, outdated place on the town's edge where truckers, night shift workers, and the occasional traveler stop by. I've worked the late shift for years, seen many faces, but his was different. He entered just after midnight, tall, gaunt, silent. His clothes were neat, but seemed from another era. He moved deliberately, each step placed with care. His eyes darted around the room, scanning every corner. Finally, he settled at the counter's far end, away from the few regulars sipping their coffee. "Coffee," he muttered, not looking up. His voice was flat, emotionless. I poured a cup and slid it over. He wrapped his long fingers around it, but didn't drink. Instead, he stared into the black liquid as if searching for something. I tried to ignore him, but unease crept in. The air felt heavy, a tension pressed against my chest. I wiped the counter, pretending not to notice his twitching fingers on the mug. Then he spoke again. "Do you think some people are destined to do terrible things?" His question caught me off guard. I forced a chuckle. That's an odd thing to ask a waitress at midnight. He looked up. Our eyes met. My stomach tightened. His face was blank, but his eyes empty, as if something inside was missing. "I've witnessed things," he whispered, "things I can't explain, and I know what I'm meant to do." I didn't know how to respond. Glancing at the clock, I wished my shift was over, but hours remained. "Well, I hope it's something good," I said, forcing a smile. His lips twitched, almost forming a smile, but it seemed forgotten. "No," he replied, "it's not." A chill ran down my spine. He reached into his pocket. For a moment, I feared he had a weapon. My breath caught, but he placed a small object on the counter. A key. "Keep this," he said. I stared at it. "Why?" "You'll know when it's time." With that, he stood and walked out, leaving his coffee untouched. I wanted to call out, ask what he meant, but no words came. I watched through the window as he vanished into the night. The rest of my shift, I couldn't stop thinking about him. The key lay there, smooth and silver, edges worn. I should have discarded it, but something urged me to keep it, so I slipped it into my pocket. Sleep eluded me that morning. Every time I closed my eyes, his face appeared. His words echoed in my mind. The next evening, while getting ready for work, I turned on the news, and there he was. His mugshot filled the screen, the same hollow eyes, the same gaunt face. A reporter's voice announced, "Authorities are searching for this man in connection to a violent incident late last night. Witnesses say he was seen leaving the scene shortly before the victim was discovered. If you see him, do not approach. Call the police immediately." I sat frozen, my mind racing. The victim was found outside an abandoned motel on the town's outskirts, strangled. No ID, no explanation, just another nameless body in the dark. I felt something press against my thigh, the key in my pocket. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. Was this what he meant? Did he know this would happen? I had to find out. I called in sick and drove to the motel. It had been closed for years. Windows boarded up, the sign barely hanging, rusted. Police tape fluttered in the breeze. My heart pounded as I approached the door. I reached into my pocket, fingers curling around the key. I didn't want to do this, but something pulled me forward. The lock clicked. The door creaked open. Inside, the air was thick with dust and a metallic scent, blood. A single chair sat in the center. On it, an old tape recorder. I hesitated, then pressed play. Static filled the room, then his voice. If you're listening to this, you've already stepped into the story. I did what I was meant to do, and you have a choice. Walk away, forget this ever happened, or turn around. The static grew louder, distorting his words. Look behind you. My breath stopped. I turned. The door was open. In the dim hallway stood a shadow, watching, waiting. Then the tape cut to silence. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the deserted playground, I felt a chill creep up my spine. The swings swayed gently in the evening breeze, their rusty chains creaking like whispers in the silence. I was 10 years old, clutching my worn-out backpack, making my way home after soccer practice. The shortcut through the park had always been my favorite route, but that day, an unsettling feeling made me quicken my pace. Halfway through, I noticed a figure sitting on a bench beneath the old oak tree. A woman, Her face, obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, sat unnervingly still. As I approached, she lifted her head, revealing piercing blue eyes that seemed to look right through me. "Emily," she called out, her voice a haunting melody that sent shivers down my spine. I stopped, confusion washing over me. "No, ma'am. My name is Sarah." Her eyes widened, a flicker of hope dancing within them. "Oh, but you look just like my Emily. She went missing years ago." An uneasy silence settled between us. I took a step back, glancing around the empty park, suddenly feeling very alone. "I'm sorry, but I need to get home." She stood abruptly, her movements jerky, almost unnatural. "Please, let me walk you. It's not safe for a young girl to be alone." Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet felt glued to the spot. I live just around the corner. I'll be fine." Ignoring my protest, she stepped closer, her gaze never leaving mine. "I insist. A mother should protect her daughter." Panic surged through me. I turned on my heel and bolted, the sound of her footsteps echoing behind me. The once familiar path twisted and turned, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. My breath came in ragged gasps as I dared a glance over my shoulder. She was still there, her pace quickening, arms reaching out as if to grasp me. "Emily, come back," she cried, her voice laced with desperation. Tears blurred my vision as I spotted the park's exit ahead. Summoning every ounce of strength, I sprinted towards it, the world narrowing to the singular goal of escape. Just as I reached the gate, a hand brushed against my shoulder. I yanked free, stumbling onto the sidewalk, nearly colliding with a passerby. "Whoa, are you okay?" a man asked, steadying me. I turned to point at the woman, but she was gone. The park lay silent, the swings now still. There was a woman. She was chasing me. He looked around, concern edged on his face. "I didn't see anyone. Let's get you home." I nodded, too shaken to argue. As we walked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The memory of her piercing blue eyes burned into my mind. That night, sleep eluded me. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind sent my heart racing. I peered out to my bedroom window, half expecting to see her standing in the shadows. But the street below was empty, bathed in the pale glow of the moon. Days passed, and I tried to convince myself it was a misunderstanding, that she was just a grieving mother who mistook me for her lost child. But the unease lingered, a constant companion. A week later, as I was leaving school, I spotted a familiar figure across the street. The same wide-brimmed hat, the same piercing eyes. She stood motionless, watching me. Fear tightened its grip, and I ducked into a nearby store, my heart pounding in my chest. I waited, peeking through the window, but she didn't follow. After what felt like an eternity, I mustered the courage to leave, sticking to crowded streets, constantly glancing over my shoulder. At home, I confided in my parents, telling them about the encounters. They exchanged worried glances, assuring me they'd contact the authorities. But deep down, I sensed their skepticism. That night, as I lay in bed, a soft tapping echoed through the room. I sat up, straining to listen. The sound continued, rhythmic and deliberate. I realized it was coming from my window. With trembling hands, I pulled back the curtain. There she was, standing in the garden, her face illuminated by the moonlight. "Emily," she whispered, her voice carrying through the glass. I stumbled back, stifling a scream. Rushing to my parents' room, I shook them awake, words tumbling out in a frantic rush. They followed me back, but by the time we reached my room, she was gone. The garden lay undisturbed, the night silent once more. The police were called, reports were filed, but no trace of her was ever found. Life slowly returned to normal, but the experience left an indelible mark. As the city lights faded, the driver's silence became more unnerving. After an exhausting day at the hospital, I yearned for the comfort of home. My scrubs clung to me, saturated with the day's toil. The city's neon glow flickered as I summoned a ride. Midnight approached, and the streets lay silent. Beneath a wavering street lamp, I shivered against the chill. My app displayed the driver's name, Daniel, arriving in a black sedan. Soon a dark vehicle halted beside me. The driver remained motionless, offering no greeting. Fatigue clouded my judgment. I assumed this was my ride. I entered, immediately overwhelmed by a cloying scent. An unsettling sensation crept over me. The driver, appearing to be in his late 30s, sat unnaturally stiff. His hands clutched the wheel with a vice-like grip. The car's interior was dimly lit, and the usual navigation screen was conspicuously blank. The cityscape receded rapidly into darkness. A knot formed in my stomach. "Excuse me, Daniel," I ventured hesitantly. He remained silent, adjusting the rearview mirror to scrutinize me. A faint, unsettling smile played on his lips before he finally spoke. "Long shift?" His tone was overly casual, almost rehearsed. I then noticed The front passenger seat was pushed forward, granting me ample leg room, yet this detail sent a shiver down my spine. It felt as though he wanted unobstructed access to the back seat. To me, forcing a smile, I replied, "Yes, just really tired." I glanced at my phone. No signal. Odd, considering we were still within the city limits. Shifting uneasily, I remarked, "I think we're going the wrong way." He offered no response. Instead, he reached toward the dashboard and pressed a button. The doors locked with a chilling finality. A cold dread washed over me. My heart thudded loudly in my chest. Clutching my phone tighter, I tried to rationalize. Perhaps it was a safety feature. Maybe I was overreacting. Then, in a soft, almost amused tone, he said, "Relax. You're just tired. Close your eyes. I'll get you home." Every instinct screamed at me to escape. I let out a nervous laugh. "Actually, I forgot something back at the hospital. Could you turn around?" Silence. He continued driving, his grip on the wheel tightening. I discreetly tried the door handle. It wouldn't budge. "Hey," I said, striving to keep my voice steady. "I need to get out. I don't feel well." He ignored me. As panic set in, the car slowed at a red light. Seizing the moment, I lunged across the seat, yanking the opposite door handle. The door swung open, and I threw myself onto the pavement. Pain shot through me as I landed, but I was free. Onlookers stared, startled by my sudden escape. A man in a leather jacket hurried over. "Are you okay? What happened?" Breathless, I glanced back to see the black car speeding away, vanishing into the night. No license plate, no identifying marks, just gone. The stranger helped me to my feet. Should I call the police? I looked at my phone. No notifications from the rideshare app. It was as if the ride had never existed. My voice wavered. What could I tell the authorities? That I entered a car without verifying details? That the driver locked the doors and took an unexpected route? I had no evidence. Shaking my head, still in shock, I murmured, "I just need to get home." The man insisted on escorting me to a nearby taxi stand. I thanked him, hands trembling as I settled into the cab. When the doors locked, a surge of fear gripped me, but the driver met my gaze in the mirror, his expression kind and concerned. "Rough night?" I nodded, words failing me. As we drove away, I checked my app again. My original ride request was still pending. The black sedan had never been my ride. Even now, I wonder, did he abandon his plan because I escaped? Or is he still out there, waiting for another weary, unsuspecting passenger to enter his car, just as I did. If you ever use a rideshare service, always verify the license plate, confirm the driver's name, and if something feels amiss, trust your instincts. It might just save your life. What do you think would have happened if I hadn't escaped? Share your thoughts below. A package arrived at my doorstep containing a sketchbook adorned with my initials, something I never ordered. As dusk settled over the quiet town of Ravenswood, I found myself alone in my room. The soft hum of my computer was the only sound breaking the silence. I was 13, navigating the vast world of social media, connecting with friends, and sharing snippets of my life. Little did I know, a simple notification would soon shatter my sense of security. One evening, as I scrolled through my Instagram feed, a new follower request appeared. At ArtLover52, the profile picture displayed a serene landscape painting, and the bio read, "Passionate about art and beauty." Assuming it was an art enthusiast interested in my amateur sketches, I accepted the request without hesitation. Almost immediately, a direct message popped up. "Your drawings are exquisite. Have you ever considered showcasing them in a gallery?" Flattered, I responded, thanking them and expressing my dream of one day having my art displayed. The conversation flowed effortlessly, discussing techniques, inspirations, and favorite artists. Over the next few weeks, our exchanges became more personal. Art lover Fatou, who introduced himself as Daniel, shared stories of his travels to famous art museums and his experiences as a former art curator. He seemed genuinely interested in my life, asking about school, family, and aspirations. His messages were always supportive, often encouraging me to pursue my passions. However, subtle shifts in his tone began to surface. He would comment on photos I had not shared publicly, mentioning details about my daily routines that I had not disclosed. One message read, "The blue dress you wore yesterday really brings out your eyes." I froze. I had worn a blue dress the previous day, but I had not posted any pictures of it. How did he know? Feeling uneasy, I confronted him, asking how he knew about the dress. He brushed it off, claiming he must have seen it in one of my older posts. Doubt gnawed at me, but I convinced myself I was overreacting. After all, he had been nothing but kind and supportive. Then, one rainy afternoon, as I sat sketching by the window, a package arrived addressed to me with no return address. Inside was a beautifully crafted sketchbook, the leather cover embossed with my initials. Tucked within the first page was a note. "For your future masterpieces, Teddy." A chill ran down my spine. I had never given Daniel my address. How did he know where I lived? Panic set in. I decided to distance myself, limiting our interactions and sharing less online. But Daniel's messages became more frequent, more insistent. He would express disappointment when I did not respond promptly. I thought we had a special connection. Why are you pulling away? One evening, as I prepared for bed, my phone buzzed with a new message from him. I miss our late-night chats. Look outside. Heart pounding, I hesitated before drawing back the curtain. There, across the street, under the dim glow of a street lamp, stood a figure holding an umbrella. Though I could not see his face, I knew it was him. Terrified, I told my parents everything. They contacted the authorities, who advised me to block Daniel and set all my profiles to private. An investigation was launched, but with limited information, there was little they could do. Weeks passed without incident, and I began to feel a semblance of normalcy returning. Then, one morning, I received an email from an unknown sender. The subject line read, "A gift for you. Against my better judgment, I opened it. It was a digital invitation to an art gallery exhibition titled The Muse. The featured artist, Daniel, the Muse, me. Attached were images of paintings, portraits of me in various settings, walking to school, reading in the park, sitting by my bedroom window. Each piece was hauntingly detailed, capturing moments I thought were private. The realization hit me hard. Daniel had been watching me, stalking me, turning my life into his personal art project. The sense of violation was overwhelming. We forwarded the email to the police, who intensified their investigation. They discovered that Daniel was not a former curator, but a man in his 50s with a history of obsessive behavior. He had been following me for months, documenting my life without my knowledge. A restraining order was issued, and Daniel was arrested for harassment. The legal proceedings were lengthy, but eventually he was convicted and sentenced. While justice was served, the experience left deep scars. I deleted all my social media accounts, became wary of new acquaintances, and found it hard to trust even the kindest gestures. The world no longer felt safe. Years have passed, and while the fear has dulled, it has never fully disappeared. I share my story as a cautionary tale. Be mindful of the connections you make online, for not everyone is who they claim to be. Even now, as I sit in a different city, in a new home, I cannot help but glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see a familiar figure watching from the shadows. The past has a way of lingering like a shadow that refuses to fade. If you or someone you know has experienced something similar, please speak out. A package arrived at my door. No sender, no name. Inside were photos of me, but in places I had never been, and in the last one, a shadow loomed behind me. I never paid much attention to my neighbors. Living alone in a small rented flat, I kept to myself. The only person I occasionally spoke to was Mr. Langley, the elderly man across the hall. He was quiet, polite, and always had this peculiar way of staring a second too long. But he was harmless, or so I thought. It started with a package. One morning, a box sat outside my door with my name on it but no return address. Thinking it was a mistaken delivery, I opened it. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. But they were not just pictures. They were images of people from my building, including me. At first they seemed like normal candid shots taken in the hallway, outside the building, near the entrance. But then I noticed something. Each face had been altered, not just edited but carefully replaced. Some had missing features. Others had their eyes swapped with unnatural glassy ones. The worst were the ones where my own face had been stitched onto the body of a stranger, standing in places I had never been. A chill ran down my spine. Someone had been watching us. I took the box to the building manager, but he dismissed it. "It is probably some prank," he said, but it did not feel like a joke. Someone had gone to great lengths to do this. That night, I could not sleep. Every creak in the floorboards made me flinch. The idea that someone had been tracking me, altering my image, sent my mind into a spiral. Who was doing this? The next morning, I noticed something strange in the hallway. The door to Mr. Langley's flat was slightly open. He was meticulous about keeping it shut. I knocked, calling his name. No answer. The unease in my gut deepened. Against my better judgment, I pushed the door wider. Inside, the air was stale, thick with an odd metallic scent. The room was dim, the curtains drawn tight. My eyes adjusted, and then I saw them. Photographs, hundreds of them. They covered the walls, the floor, the ceiling. Faces, some familiar, some distorted beyond recognition. Some were missing eyes. Others had mouths that did not belong to them. And in the center of the room, a desk cluttered with scissors, glue, and stacks of printed photos. And then I saw mine. A dozen versions of me, some laughing, some crying, some standing in eerie, dark places I had never been. One had my face with someone else's expression, twisted, wide-eyed, grinning like a corpse. My stomach turned. This was beyond obsession. It was something else. A rustling sound snapped me back. My breath caught. Someone was behind me. Slowly I turned. Mr. Langley stood there, his frail body motionless, his cloudy eyes fixed on me. "You should not have come in," he whispered. His voice was soft, but it carried something heavy beneath it. My heart pounded. "What is all this?" I asked, barely recognizing my own voice. He took a step forward. They were unfinished. His gaze flicked to the desk. I was making them right. Making what right? My voice wavered. He tilted his head, as if confused by my question. "The faces," he murmured. "They never right." I backed toward the door. "You have been watching us," I said, my voice firmer now. I had to. His lips curled into a smile that sent ice through my veins. To fix the mistakes. I could not stay. Every instinct screamed at me to run. I bolted for the door, yanking it open, sprinting down the hall. I did not stop until I reached my flat. Locking the door behind me, my chest heaved, my mind racing. I had to call the police. But as I reached for my phone, a noise stopped me. A soft, slow rustling sound. It was coming from inside my flat. I turned, every hair on my body standing on end. My eyes scanned the room, and then I saw it. The box. It was on my table, though I had left it by the door, and something new was inside. I stepped closer, heart hammering. It was a single photograph. Me, standing in Mr. Langley's apartment. But in the picture, I was not alone. Behind me, a shadowy figure loomed, barely visible, its eyes hollow, its mouth stretched unnaturally wide. I staggered back, the air thick with dread. I had just been in that room. There had been no one else. The walls seemed to close in. Then the door handle rattled. Someone was outside. I did not move. The rattling stopped. Then a whisper seeped through the door. "You are almost perfect now." My breath hitched. Then silence. I stayed there, frozen, until the sun crept through the window. By morning, I packed my things. I had to leave. I did not care about my lease or deposits. I did not care about reporting it. I just needed to be gone. But as I left, something caught my eye. Mr. Langley's door was shut, and taped to it was a new photograph. I stepped closer, unable to stop myself. It was of me. Not a distorted version, not an altered one, just me. But in the background, just behind my shoulder, a pair of pale, empty eyes stared out. I left that day and never looked back. But sometimes, when I catch my reflection in a window, I swear, just for a second, there is someone else standing behind me, watching. As I rifled through the library's forbidden archives, a mugshot of Mr. Grafton stared back at me, revealing a past more sinister than I could have imagined. I have always loved books. Growing up, libraries felt like safe havens, quiet, predictable, and filled with endless stories. That is why, when I got a part-time job at the local library, it felt perfect. The pay was not much, but I enjoyed the peaceful atmosphere and the satisfaction of organizing shelves. The head librarian, Mr. Grafton, was a soft-spoken man in his 60s, with silver-rimmed glasses and a gentle smile. He had worked there for decades and seemed to know everything about the place. When I first started, he was kind and patient, always offering advice on how to sort books or deal with difficult patrons. His presence was reassuring, but then little things began to unsettle me. One evening, as I was reshelving books near the back of the library, I noticed something odd. The section where old newspapers were stored was always locked. Mr. Grafton had told me they were archives, and only he had the key. That night, I saw the door slightly ajar. Curiosity got the better of me. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of aged paper. Stacks of yellowed newspapers reached the ceiling. My fingers traced over the spines of old books when something caught my eye. A desk, tucked into the corner, covered in files. One of them was open. I should not have looked. The first thing I saw was a black and white mugshot of a man, his eyes staring blankly at the camera. Below it a name, Gregory Grafton. My stomach tightened. The article beneath was even worse. It detailed a horrific case from decades ago, an elementary school teacher accused of something vile, and then it hit me. Gregory Grafton. Mr. Grafton. I stumbled back, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The file contained clippings, case notes, court records. He had changed his name slightly, but it was him. My hands trembled as I flipped through more papers, my eyes darting over words I did not want to read. He had been convicted. He had served time. And now he worked here. A floorboard creaked behind me. I turned, my heart slamming against my ribs. Mr. Grafton stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You should not be in here," he said quietly. I tried to speak, to come up with an excuse, but my throat had gone dry. He stepped closer, blocking the only exit. The warmth I had once felt from him was gone. In its place was something else, something cold and measured. He took another step. "You know," he continued, "I was hoping we would get along, but you have been snooping." I gripped the edge of the desk. My mind raced. What should I do? Run? Scream? Confront him? "You read things you should not have read," he murmured. "That is a problem." I bolted. I shoved past him with all my strength and sprinted through the narrow rows of bookshelves. The dim lights cast long shadows, turning the familiar library into a maze of darkness. I could hear his footsteps behind me, steady and deliberate. I reached the front desk, my hands fumbling for my bag, my phone. I needed to call someone, but as I yanked it out, the battery icon blinked red, dead. My only option was to get out, but the front doors were locked. Panic surged through me. I had locked them myself earlier, as per closing protocol. Only Mr. Grafton had the key. My breath came in ragged bursts as I turned, searching for another way out. The staff room. There was a back exit there. I sprinted toward it, my shoes squeaking against the tiled floor. Behind me, the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps sent shivers up my spine. He was not running. He did not need to. I reached the door, grabbed the handle, and stopped. It was locked. A soft chuckle came from the darkness behind me. "You really should not have gone into that room," he said. I turned, pressing myself against the door. He stood a few feet away, his hands folded behind his back. "What do you want?" My voice came out hoarse. Mr. Grafton sighed, as if disappointed. "I wanted things to be simple. I liked you. You were smart. But now you have forced my hand." He reached into his pocket. I did not wait to see what he pulled out. I grabbed a heavy book from a nearby cart and hurled it at him. The moment he flinched, I lunged past him, darting back toward the main hall. My mind screamed at me to think, to find something, anything, to get out of here. Then I remembered the windows. There was a large one near the reading area. If I could break it. I ran, my legs burning, behind me. I could hear him moving faster now. The sound of his shoes striking the floor echoed in my ears. I reached the window. Grabbing a metal bookend from a nearby table, I swung it with all my strength. The glass shattered. Cold air rushed in as shards rained onto the carpet. I scrambled onto the ledge, feeling the sting of broken glass on my hands. Just as I was about to jump, a hand grabbed my ankle. I screamed, kicking wildly. "Do not make this harder than it needs to be," he hissed. I kicked again, harder this time. His grip loosened. Without thinking, I threw myself through the window. I landed hard on the pavement outside, pain shooting through my knees and palms. Ignoring it, I scrambled to my feet and ran, not stopping, until I reached the nearest street light. Only then did I dare to look back. Mr. Grafton stood at the broken window, watching me. He did not try to follow. He just stood there, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he stepped back into the darkness. I ran all the way home. The next day, I called the police. I gave them everything: the files, the articles, his real name. When they arrived at the library, he was gone. No one knew where he went. The authorities tried to track him down, but it was as if he had vanished. His apartment was empty, his bank account untouched. It was as if he had never existed. And yet, some nights, when I am alone, I feel like I am being watched. Books go missing from my shelves, only to reappear in odd places. My mail sometimes arrives opened, and once, when I was closing my curtains, I swore I saw a figure across the street, standing perfectly still, watching. I still love libraries, but I never stay after dark, and I never, ever trust a friendly librarian. What do you think happened to him? Let me know in the comments. My phone buzzed at 3:12 a.m., displaying a photo of me sleeping, taken from inside my own home. I once believed that ending a relationship was straightforward. You part ways, sever connections, and move forward. However, I discovered that some individuals refuse to release their grip, regardless of your pleas or the distance you put between you. It began with the messages. Initially, they were sorrowful. Please, speak to me. I cannot comprehend what I did wrong. I miss you. Standard sentiments. I chose to disregard them. Then their tone shifted. Do you think you can simply erase me? I observe you. I know your whereabouts. Each time his name illuminated my screen, my stomach churned. I blocked his number, but it was futile. He tracked me down on social media. New profiles, various aliases, yet the message remained consistent. You cannot conceal yourself from me. I altered my passwords, but he still breached them. Every attempt I made to distance myself, he discovered another avenue to re-enter my life. Then matters intensified. One evening, I was returning home from work. It was late, around 11:30 p.m., but the city streets buzzed with their usual clamor. I recall glancing over my shoulder, a habit I'd developed in recent weeks. That's when I spotted him, just a few steps behind me. His hood obscured his face, but I recognized him. I quickly turned a corner and slipped into a 24-hour convenience store, my heart pounding in my chest. The cashier barely acknowledged me as I pretended to peruse the snack aisle. I lingered. 5 minutes. 10. Then, cautiously, I ventured back outside. He had vanished. For the first time in weeks, I exhaled a sigh of relief. Perhaps I had imagined it. Maybe I was being overly suspicious. But upon arriving home, I noticed My apartment door was slightly ajar. I halted. I was certain I had locked it. I always double-checked. My fingers quivered as I nudged it open. The interior air felt dense, stale, as if someone had been inside for an extended period, waiting. I clutched my keys so tightly that they left deep indentations in my palm. I inspected every room, the bathroom, the kitchen, the bedroom. Everything appeared untouched, but as I moved to close my closet door, a chill ran down my spine. A note was affixed to the inside. I told you, you cannot hide from me. I should have contacted the authorities. I wanted to, but what evidence did I possess? No signs of forced entry, no surveillance in my building. Just a note that could have originated from anywhere. So I did the only thing that came to mind. I relocated. A new apartment, a different phone number, even a new job. I erased all my online profiles. I confided in no one about my whereabouts, not even my closest friends. For a period, it seemed effective. I felt secure. I convinced myself he had finally relented. Until last night. I was unlocking my front door when I observed it. A faint smudge on the handle. My stomach tightened as I brushed my thumb over it. It felt greasy, as if someone had touched it moments before my arrival. I forced myself inside, securing the door behind me. I illuminated every light in my apartment as I methodically checked each corner. Nothing. Everything was as I had left it. Then I noticed my phone. It rested on my nightstand, the screen aglow. One unread message, no identifiable number, just a solitary image. It was a photograph of me, asleep. A sharp, ragged breath escaped me. My gaze darted to the window. The curtains were drawn, but suddenly they seemed insubstantial. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling as I dialed. The police arrived promptly. They conducted a thorough search of the apartment. No signs of forced entry. No evidence of anyone outside. It could be a prank, one officer suggested. Perhaps someone obtained an old picture. But I knew. That night, sleep eluded me. Every noise amplified my anxiety. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, the whisper of the wind against my window. Then, at 3:12 a.m., my phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, it was a video. Unsteady, low quality, yet unmistakable. It depicted me walking home from work, filmed from a distance, from the shadows. The video abruptly ended. Then a single text appeared. See you soon. I hadn't realized I was crying until I felt the tears on my hands. He had never departed. He had been observing all along. I hastily packed a bag. I needed to leave again, to find a place where he couldn't follow, somewhere he would never locate me. But as I reached my front door, I paused. Something was there. Something is awaiting me. A small, folded piece of paper. My hands trembled as I unfolded it, dread weighing heavily. This time, there was no message, no threats, just a single Polaroid of me standing in my apartment, captured from behind, from within my own home. That was the breaking point. I departed that night and never looked back. Yet, even now, in a different city, under a new identity, I sleep with one eye open. Because no matter how far I flee, no matter how well I conceal myself, I can still sense his gaze. And I dread that one day I'll turn around and he will be right there. Could you rest easy after experiencing this? Share your thoughts below. Hello guys, which story scared you the most? Let me know in the comments. And thanks for listening, everyone. If you stuck around until the end, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you never miss a new episode. As always, I'm looking for more story ideas, so drop a comment below with any themes or experiences you'd like to hear next. Stay safe out there, and until next time, keep your eyes open.